It's an honor for me to be able to present our speaker this afternoon. For those of you who are knowledgeable in the field of deaf education, she is a familiar figure. Many of us for years have admired and envied the type of oral day public school program that's available to people who live in the Dayton area. I had an opportunity years ago to, our speaker doesn't know this, to take coursework under a woman in special education, deaf education, who had started the Dayton program. And she possessed this program as a mother with her newborn child. And she said to me one time, I couldn't have retired from that position when I did had I not known that such a competent person would follow me. I think that there's a lesson in the way our speaker also got into this field. She didn't know when she was a college girl that this was what she wanted to do. Her own field had been French and English as her major for a bachelor's degree in Muskingum, Ohio. And this was about the time that we were beginning to have a lot of attention given to the aspect of tender, loving care and importance of having a child grow up in his or her own home, that just living in a residential situation makes you different. And our speaker went to the State School for the Deaf in Michigan and learned some more about teaching deaf and paid her little term for the experience by teaching there 1 year, and was lured into further work, getting her master's degree from Columbia, along with the specialized degree in education of the deaf in Lexington, New York. And this was back when it was pretty important to have such a degree because they didn't offer things in your colleges and universities. And she then went into first a teaching position in Dayton, and I think it has been, should I tell how many years you've been principal there? I'll let her tell you, but she's been there long enough that those of us who have the opportunity to visit, see this program in operation, know that she has had the wisdom of hanging on to the good of the past and adapting to all of the innovations that make for a better present and future. May I present Ms. Caldwell?
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. And students, I guess this is what you are, isn't it? When I was a very young child, probably 8 or 9, I used to visit my sister, who was a nurse in Columbus at one of the big hospitals. She lived right near the State School for the Deaf in Columbus, but that was the old state school. Now they have a country club for a state school. But this one was the old one. And my sister lived in an apartment near there, and I used to go across the street and stand on the outside of the fence looking in at children, doing this, and wondering what it was all about. I mean, I was little, and I had never seen a deaf person, and they were little, and they would look out at me, like I was a dog or a cat outside the fence, but never any sign of voice or try to communicate with me in any way. Well, I wondered a great deal about that, but it left my mind for a good many years after that, until after I had graduated from college. And then I went to, as Mrs. Richardson told you, the Michigan State School for the Deaf. But I didn't know I was at the Michigan State School for the Deaf. I was there to find a job, any kind of a job. And I saw this big building with the columns and all, and I thought, well, this looks like a likely place. So I went in and I said, do you have anything to offer me in the way of work? I said, I just graduated from college last June, and I had stayed at home for a couple of months, but I didn't want to stay home any longer, so I would like to work. The reason I chose Flint was because I had two sisters who were teaching there, one in the college and one in the elementary schools. And there was a big, fat gentleman in this office, and he said to me, "Do you know where you are?" And I said, "No." And he says, "You're in the Michigan State School for the Deaf." And he said, "I do have a place open in the training center." And of course I didn't even know what that meant. And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, we will teach you to teach deaf children, but in order to learn this, you must take care of 16 little deaf girls after school hours and at night. And you must live here at the school." Well, if I were to face that today, I would probably say no. But at that time, when I was 21, you see, that didn't mean much. I thought that was a lark. So I moved into the school, and I took care of 16 little deaf children after school hours. And during the day, I went to school and learned how to teach the deaf. That was invaluable experience for me. Not just because of what I learned about teaching the deaf, but I lived with the deaf, and I really got to be a part of them. Those little youngsters, well, I couldn't read their signs, and I never did learn to read their signs, yet we had a feeling one for the other. And the child could come to me, and just by the blink of his eyes, he could tell me what he wanted. And I could go to the child, and just by a pat or a motion, I could indicate to him what I wanted, so that we got to know each other. And I still think that my experiences at the Michigan State School for the Deaf taught me just about as much as I ever learned anywhere. And one of the things that it taught me was that I never again wanted to be a part of an institution. I didn't care for institutional living, and I didn't care for the children being taken away from parents, and I didn't care for the sign languages. Now, I think signs may have a place in the education of the deaf, and after the child has established communication through speech and lip reading, and then wants to communicate with only deaf people at sometimes, I think it's necessary to know signs. And I'll grant this, that maybe language ability can be extended a little bit further if the child knows signs. But I do think that it is a hindrance to a person who wants to live in a hearing world, and a hindrance to a person who needs to make his way through communication, and by that I mean through speech. Because if you are, if you're going to communicate through the manual method only, you have limited yourself to a very few people. Whereas if you can lip read and understand what other people say, and if you can talk well enough that you can make other people know what you want to say, then you can communicate with anyone, and you can get along in a hearing world and earn your own way. This is really the philosophy of Kennedy School for the Deaf in Dayton, Ohio. We want to take these youngsters who are deaf or who are so hard of hearing that they have not learned the natural speech, and train them in the processes of speech, lip reading, and subject matter until they are sufficiently educated that they can take their place in a hearing and a normal society, and can earn their own living and be self-sufficient in that society. In the state of Ohio, I think it was about 1930, there were some decisions made at the state level that perhaps it was wrong to send all of the children in Ohio who were deaf to a centralized school in Columbus. So about 15 or 18 centers for day schools were set up at that time, such as the one in Dayton. Now, the one in Dayton had been there before, however, on a small scale, because a foresighted woman by the name of Nan Kennedy, and that's how the school got its name, by the way, had one deaf child who was the son of a doctor in Oakwood. And she had worked with this child during summer months and had found that she could teach this child very easily, and had wanted to, the father had wanted him to stay at home and go to school too, so Nan Kennedy went to the Board of Education and asked if such a class could be established in the Dayton schools for this child and others who might be in the area. So at that time, and this was in 1899, the first class for the deaf in Dayton was established. Now this remained a very small class until about 1930, and it was at this time that Miss Humphreys came to Dayton, who was my predecessor as principal of the school. And it was at this time that the state made the decisions of establishing grounded day school centers for deaf and hard of hearing children. At the time that Miss Humphreys came there, I believe there were about 48 children in the school. And they had the back wing of a school on Salem Avenue with about 5 classes, I believe, to begin with. But they did some groundwork, and they established a routine. They were able to grade these youngsters and classify them, and they started giving the necessary tests, the hearing tests, the psychological tests, and so forth, that is necessary for background in this kind of work. And they really got the school going off at a good pace. At the time I came there, which was in 1939, I came as a preschool teacher for deaf children. And it might amaze you if I tell you that at that time I had 17 youngsters in my preschool class, all by myself, ranging in age from 3 to 10 years of age. And I handled this in a preschool setup for quite a few years. I think about 10 to be exact, before the state passed a law that you could have no more than 8 in your class. So when I had 8 children, I really was lost. I didn't know what to do with so few children. But I soon learned that there was a great deal more that I could do. When I became principal in 1949, that's right, 10 years after I had been there, we had about 70 children, and today we have 177 children in our school. Now, Kennedy School does not serve just Dayton itself. It serves Dayton and about 6 surrounding counties. This is an area school. Each school district that sends a child to Kennedy School pays tuition into the Dayton Board of Education for this child. Transportation is paid for by the State Board of Education, and the child is brought in daily and taken home daily. He has the opportunity of living in the heart of his family. He has the opportunity of living in the heart of the city that he's going to live in the rest of his life, no doubt. And he knows the people in the town. He knows how to get around on public conveyances. He learns this through the means of the school. He also becomes acquainted with the type of work that goes on in Dayton and what might be possible for him. And he is at home all the time, so he doesn't come home a stranger for vacations, and maybe we'll be with the family 2 or 3 days out of each year. This is a very important part of our philosophy, and we have carried it to the extent that now we even accept no children in boarding homes anymore. They must all live in their own home, and they must all be taken care of by their own parents, so that this parent may become educated with the child in taking care of his training. In the first place, at Kennedy School, after the child has been tested psychologically, after he has been tested for his hearing loss, and ideally, after he has been seen at such centers as you have here at Muncie, or at the Dayton Hearing and Speech Center in Dayton, we will take the child in a preschool setup. In our preschool, we have 2 teachers, 2 trained teachers. They handle 22 children a day. Now, these children are handled in 2 different sessions, one session in the morning and the other in the afternoon. But the first teacher is responsible for the morning class, with the other teacher as a helper. In the afternoon class, the other teacher takes over the responsibility of the class, and the morning teacher is the helper. Now, of course, with 22 children, you know that there are always 5 or 6 children that can be taken from the group and worked on individually. And in fact, we could use possibly 3 teachers in this setup instead of 2, but we have a great shortage of teachers in Dayton. And this is one reason why I consented to come here, because I thought I might look you over and maybe I could find some recruits for our school next year. After the child has been in preschool for a year or 2 years or 3 years, if we find it necessary, he may move into a kindergarten class. Now, we have 2 choices of kindergarten classes. One that is moving fast and one that is moving slowly. Now, this may not be due to the child's IQ, you know. It could be some other thing that makes him slow to develop. One thing is his ability to lip read, or his inability to lip read. How well do you people know what lip reading is? Have you had an introduction to this? Do you realize what it entails? Well, you better turn that off for a little while, because I'm going to stop and get some things out. My talks are really not one that can go on a tape recorder, because I stop and pick up things to show you. On the first day that the little children come to school, the teachers will have available a goldfish bowl with goldfish in it in the center of the table, on a low table, where the children may crawl up on the table and look at them if they want to. Also, there is almost always a mother available with a little baby, a real little baby in her arms, someplace around the school. So the teachers have ready flashcards such as these, and they have them not in one place in the room, but in a number of places in the room. And maybe not all the babies are crying, but they're pictures of babies, however. Then in several places in the room, she has little objects such as these. That happens to be a fish if you can't see it from there. And little tiny objects such as a baby. She also has pictures of fish sitting around the room. Every day after this child has first come to school, she will take the child's hand and lead him to the fish bowl and to the real baby that happens to be there. And she will have these in her hands, and she'll say, "Baby, baby," and point to each one, "Baby, baby," and say it to the child. Now, if the child has had no lip reading at all, he doesn't know, what you're doing. He doesn't realize that there's any attempt at communication. He doesn't know why you are making those funny motions with your mouth, and he just looks at you. And this is all right for the first few days, you see. She'll do the same thing with fish. And she'll have the little object, and she'll go to the fish bowl and say, fish, fish. Or she'll say, this is a fish. After she's done this for several days, she'll put the two pictures someplace and the two objects there beside them. She'll take the child to a table where these are laying, and she'll say, well, maybe the child will do nothing, you see. And so she'll take his hand and she'll put it on the object of the fish and put it over on the picture of the fish. And then she'll say to him, now I'm not using voice because I want you to get the reaction the child does, you see. And by this time, the brighter child will know that he's supposed to pick up that baby and put it over there on the picture, you see. Well, then you start this lesson for several days, over and over, with just those two words, till one day you come to the table and you say to the child, and immediately he picks up the right one and puts it on the card. So you say, and he picks it up and puts it on the card. Then you say, he's got it now. We can add another word. One word after another, very slowly, but some children will go very quickly at lip reading, and some children it takes forever. I can remember one boy that I had who was 3 and a half when I started him in preschool, and I thought that child would never learn to lip read. I struggled and struggled with him, and I know I had him in preschool 3 years at least. And even when he left preschool, he wasn't a very good lip reader. But he's now a senior at Ohio University at Athens, Ohio, so I guess he didn't do too badly. Lip reading is, of course, the very first lesson the child has to learn, and with this is something that's very important to all of us, and that is powers of observation. We try to train these little youngsters right from the very beginning to be aware of everything in his surroundings and to have a great interest in everything in his surroundings. Well, you know what this calls for, don't you? It calls for a teacher that has this kind of interest and this kind of observation. She has to be aware, and she has to be fun-loving, and she has to observe the differences about these children in order to train them to do this. Then comes the speech work. Now, these youngsters, of course, say nothing when we get them, unless they have a little tiny bit of hearing or something of that sort. Then they may say mama, or they may say bye-bye, or a few simple words of this sort. But as a rule, they say nothing. So we start out with the simple sounds. Usually it's with the hearing aids, and we use the big group hearing aids. Right at present we have 2 different kinds. And in 5 of our classrooms we are modern enough to have the walk-away type of hearing aids. We don't have the wireless microphone yet, but I hear this is coming. But we do have the little unit that the child wears, and it has a little battery box that he wears around his waist, and he can go anywhere in the room, and he picks up the sound from a loop in the room, or he can switch to microphone and go out in the hall and come to the office and talk to me. Or the teacher can plug right into his little battery box and talk directly to that child and have no one else listen. So we feel in these classrooms we're quite advanced. Not only that, in the preschool we have vibrating floor, which is just in the process of being put in now. The floor is in, but it isn't carpeted yet. But we have a machine that picks up the vibrations of speech over a microphone or of music, and it is reverberated through this hollow floor until, well, you can hardly stand to sit on a chair that's on that floor. I mean, it jiggles so. And the children picks up this vibration, and it is remarkable, the change in their speech. They no longer say banana, na, 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 you know. They get the right number of syllables in it now. And it's so interesting to see the change come about from just some little thing that you wouldn't realize could possibly make this change. Of course, we realize that a lot of the hearing these youngsters use through their hearing aids and training units is not really hearing. It is vibration and the amplification through vibration that they use anyhow. Well, with this vibrating floor, and no deaf room should be without one, we have found that the children are getting more than ever. And we hope someday to have one of these in each classroom. Now, we don't have it all over the room. It just takes up about this much area that is vacant up here in front of the chairs. And when the teacher wants to have her class, they take their little chairs and go up to the front of the classroom and sit on this floor that vibrates. No matter what the teacher is saying, nor no matter what music is being played, it vibrates through that floor, and the child is aware of this. Nothing can be said on that floor but what the child turns and looks at you. And of course, this is quite a change from the old classroom that had the tile floor and your child sitting back in there, and you had to go and tap each one on the shoulder, you see. It makes quite a difference. In teaching speech, we start out with the sound elements. Not the alphabet as you know it, but the sound elements. Like which is really the first one we teach because it is the easiest for the child to see. Not always easiest for him to produce, but easiest for him to see. He feels the teacher's face like this, and he watches her, and he hears her, if he can hear it all. Make this sound. Then she puts his fingers on his own face, and he tries to do that too. And maybe he does it right the first time. If the child is relaxed and easy to get along with, you can be sure you're pretty lucky to get pretty good sound from him. But we have many tense children these days, and they're apt to pick up the tongue in the back and say, and you have a very peculiar sound, which has to be corrected, you see. Then we go from a vowel sound to, a consonant sound such as M, to the breath consonants. And we teach the children right from the very beginning that these are breath sounds. And we associate them all with a blue feather. These are the sounds like P to you, to a deaf child. T to you, to a deaf child. Now they have to learn tongue position for this, and they have to learn breath control for this. In the case of the nasal sounds, they have to learn the proper amount of nasal resonation. Many things have to be taught before the child can make good sounds. After they have learned 2 or 3 sounds, we start putting them together. And this is where the vibrating floor comes in real handy. For instance, they have learned the sound ah, and they have learned the sound You say to the child, now we're going to say ah, ah, and pretty soon you say, let's go faster. Ma, ma. Then you give it a little oomph on one syllable, and you say mama, and the child has a word. Or you can turn it around and you can say arm. Child has a word, so you show him his arm. A child in the preschool, if he's quite good, can learn about 50 to 60 words a year. He learns more than that in lip reading if he is good. If he's poor, he learns a lot fewer than that. And this is why I say we can move the child out of preschool at any time we feel he can do it. We can move him into a fast-moving kindergarten, or we can move him into a slow one. After the kindergarten, we have 3 first grades at our school with the same choice, either fast-moving, slow-moving, or in between. Or they may have to go through at least 2 of these first grades in order to accomplish all of the material that has to be accomplished in first grade. Now, I've told you about speech, and I've told you about lip reading, but I haven't mentioned the hardest lesson for the deaf child. You would say, and I would have said this too when I was your age, that speech is the hardest, but it is not. The hardest thing for the deaf child to learn is language. And it remains the hardest throughout his lifetime. A deaf child can never come up to what a hearing child knows, because he doesn't hear. And this is the sum and the substance of it all. We hear so many things that we pay no attention to. It's almost pitiful. But it's there just the same, and you are learning from it whether you know it or not. Now, the deaf child, and particularly I mean by this the extremely deaf child, doesn't hear these little innuendos that we have in our language. Or he doesn't hear the inflections that can mean something entirely different. May I use the board for a while? Here I go again. I just wanted to show you some of the differences that you know by taking them for granted that have to be taught to a deaf child. And one of these is the different meanings that we have for speech or for words. I'd like to put a little diagram on the board for you so that you will see what I mean. This is what a deaf child learns. A cup. And this is drilled into him as being a cup for, say the first 12 years of his life. Maybe a little less than that. But that is the only thing that he has about that word. He knows it's that and that it's to drink from. Then this is what you call the top layer. But there are many other facets to that word. So I'm going to draw you a diamond. I'm not an artist. All right, here's one. Can you imagine when a deaf child reads a sentence that has in it the words, to cup your hands, what he would think of, what would be here in his mind? to cup your hand. He couldn't begin to fathom what that means. Another is Jack won a gold cup. Well, that wouldn't be quite so far out, because there is something there that you can show him. And actually, a cup or an honoring cup, loving cup, does look a little like a cup. Also, a baby cup looks a little like a cup to a child. But what about this one? A tempest in a teacup. Can you imagine what a deaf person would think about that? It wouldn't mean at all what it means to you. Or Lincoln's cup of sorrow was filled to overflow. Again, he was in his cup. Now that's a very simple word that I chose to show you, and I think I could go on with that with several other meanings. The other day I walked into the classroom, and the children looked up at me and said, "Oh, Miss Caldwell penetrated the room." And the teacher nearly died because she said, "Oh, we've just had the word penetrate." And I had them look it up in the dictionary. It said pass through, so I penetrated the room. So you see, even the dictionary isn't always a help to these youngsters. It's very difficult to teach them language. Another thing, a little deaf child has no idea of language sequence or of number sequence. They would just as soon say, "Baby little fell floor on." That would mean just as much sense to them as to say, "The baby fell on the floor." So they have to be taught sequence. And in order to do this, we use a very old system called a slate system for teaching language. And each slate is headed by a question. The first one being who, of course. And the child is taught what we call who words, or in nouns and pronouns to you. But he is taught these words under the question form who. Then when he gets ready to ask a question, he knows that if he wants to know something about a person, he has to start that question with who. And if later on, if he wants to know what happened, he has to know that that has to do with a verb, you see. He has to learn the sequence. And to bring this illustration to mind, to illustrate it for you, I'll tell you a little joke that happened a long time ago when I was at the State School for the Deaf in Michigan. There was a pretty bright little boy that used to fight a great deal on the playground. And he was brought in to the dormitory practically every day, fighting, and so the teacher said to him, "Johnny, why do you do this?" And he looked up, just as big as life, and he said, I why'd her 3 times, and she never did because me. And you see, he meant to say, I have asked her a question, but she didn't answer me. And he knew that the answer to his question would have to start with because, you see. This is what you call a learned unnatural language situation. But he got across his point. We, at Kennedy School, and I'll finish up here quickly so you can ask questions if you want to, we have classes through the high school, if it is necessary to keep the child this long. We are connected and in a wing to a hearing school, and at any time we feel that it is advantageous to the child, or if we feel that the child is capable of doing this, we place him in a hearing school for a certain amount of his classes. And he can eventually go completely into a hearing class if this is if he is intelligent enough and his speech and lip reading are good enough. We will keep the children through high school if it is necessary, but we like to put them back into the public high schools if we can. We have two classes at Belmont High School that are geared to high school children. One of these is a slow learning class, and the other is a class that have some college preparatory children in it. Now these youngsters may take all of their classes out in the regular school, coming to the special teacher for just tutoring, or they may take part of them out. And in most instances, they take language courses with the special teacher, and possibly history. We have, at the present time, we have 8 youngsters in college at Gallaudet. 3 youngsters in college other than Gallaudet, that is, regular colleges for hearing children. We work closely with rehabilitation with all of the youngsters to find out what kind of work that these youngsters can do, and to see that they are placed in a job of some sort. And we have pretty great success with this, working closely with rehabilitation. And in the Dayton area, of course, there is quite a lot of work that a deaf person can do. Many of our girls do card punch work at the field. And one of them drove up to see me the other day in a brand new Buick. And she said, are you still driving a 1962 Ford? And I said, yes. But she had a new 68 Buick. The boys are welcome in many of the factories where it is noisy. Some of our boys are working in banks, on having had the multilith work. Some of the girls are working in dry cleaning shops. There are many places if you just hunt for them, and of course this takes somebody to do it, and it takes time. It really is a job in itself.